All right, everybody, we are going to cover some punctuation for your quotes today. This might seem something that's very trivial or not as important, but it is really important to make sure that you're doing your citations correctly, and also just to make sure that you're not messing with the overall flow of your sentence, especially if there's a quotation in there. So let's review some punctuation information for quotations. Your first thing, obviously, anytime you are quoting something that is not your own words, you are going to use quotation marks. Anytime you get information from a teacher, from a friend, if you get information off of a website or an article, you always need to make sure you put those words in quotation marks. Any words that are not your own always need to be in quotation marks. Here's a little handy dandy example down at the bottom here if you'd like to take a look at it, but I'm pretty sure you guys have had this drilled in your brain for quite a while now. So end punctuation can be anything from periods, commas, semicolons, exclamation points, question marks, those types of things. Anytime you have a period or a comma or a semicolon that's ending your own sentence, that needs to come after the citation that's in parentheses. So for example, we have a comma that comes after the citation, even though the quote is over here. We have a period that comes after the citation, even though the quote ends right there. And then we have a question mark that comes after the citation because it's a part of that author's sentence. Now, if you have a question mark or an exclamation point that is within the quote that you're using. So you have, for example, a doctor who's posing a question, and you need to make sure that that's put within your quote. Then you do put it within the quotation marks. You wouldn't put it afterwards because it's not a part of your sentence. It's a part of the quote that you're using. But anytime you're using a quote and you're ending your own sentence, then you would put your own form of end punctuation after the citation. So after the last name and the page number, that's where you would put your end punctuation. So again, it mentions up here, question marks and exclamation points should appear within the quotation marks if they are part of the quoted passage, but after the parenthetical citation if they are part of your text. So just make sure to keep your end punctuation with your words and the end punctuation for the author with the author's words. Colons. Colons can be used to introduce a quotation after an introductory sentence or phrase. So the example I have down here is, the horse is clearly agitated and confused by the speaker's actions. That's our introductory sentence. You put a colon there and you go straight into the quote. These are handy to utilize if you have a nice introduction sentence that you would like to use before your quote, but it is a complete sentence, but you don't want to end it there because you're transitioning right into your quote. Colons are really helpful to use in this case. And this is a great example to refer back to if this is ever something you get confused on. Slashes. A lot of times you're going to use slashes when you're quoting poetry. If you have a line break, you're going to want to use the slash to indicate that line break there. So, for example, it says, Keats often yearns for sensual pleasures over the rational intellect in his poem, Oh, for a life of sensations rather than thoughts. The poet proposes the notion that all charms fly, line break, at the mere touch of cold philosophy. So anytime you're reading a poem and that line ends, you're going to want to put a slash to indicate that if you are quoting directly from a poem. Ellipses. I love ellipses, specifically for the purpose of they give you the option to not use the entire quote if not all of the information in the quote is pertinent or necessary for the point that you're trying to make in your own text. So when you leave out any words, you must indicate the omission with an ellipses, which is the 3 periods with a space before and after. So for example, this guy that's circled in red down here. So again, ellipses are great for when you have a really long quote, but you don't need all of the information from the quote. but maybe you want a little bit from the beginning and a little bit from the end, you can use an ellipses to do that. You can put the start of your quote and then up to the point where you need the information, put an ellipses, skip over the stuff in the middle, and then incorporate the end part of your quote that you also think is pertinent to your writing. So this example says, the narrator clearly wishes to prolong the night. I want tonight to be long as my life. And then there's a little bit of that quote that obviously wasn't necessary for this particular writer's point. So you include the ellipses, and then it says, more than any other night of my life, I want to feel alive. And then notice the page number and then the period after the page number. And notice the explanation after the quote, pointing to the relevance. Square brackets. Anytime you are going to alter or change anything within the quote to improve the overall comprehension of the quote that you're putting in, you have to indicate that with square brackets because it's not the direct quote. So, for example, it says, Ronald Sharp discusses this use of religion at length and makes the point that time and again in Keats's major poems, he sets up a traditional religious framework. It keeps going on in that quote. But the point of this is, it says over in the corner there, note the original quote contained the word his, but for clarity, the writer has altered this and actually put the author's name there to make it clearer for the reader. A lot of times this will be beneficial if you need to add an S onto something in terms of any tense issues, or an example like this where you might need to include the author's name for the clarification purposes. But anytime you change, even if it's just a letter within a word, you need to put the square brackets there because you're not quoting the exact text, and you want to make sure that you indicate that you're not quoting that exact text, and you have to make changes for clarification. And this is just a little review from the quote integration and also from quote punctuation. Include quotations in your writing to back up your arguments and ideas, making your points well substantiated and giving you plenty of credibility in your own writing. Your formula, anytime you're including a quote, is your point, your quotation, and then an explanation or some type of relevance to your quote. Never plagiarize. We'll go over some citation ways and proper ways of citing things next week or the week after. But you guys know, don't copy and paste things without citing them, and make sure you're not plagiarizing anybody else's work ever. Make sure you know how to use the correct punctuation. Make sure you know how to use square brackets, slashes, and ellipses, which is why we just went over that information. And lastly, different types of text, plays, poetry, novels, articles, etc., all have different conventions and formats. Make sure you know them all and how to properly quote them. All right, that's it for this video. If you do have some follow-up questions, make sure you email me or reach out to me in some type of way before you begin the practice. And good luck on your practice.